Fletcher Solicitors are proud to sponsor the Mama Academy podcast series. We are one of the UK's leading birth injury specialists, trusted by families with the most complex legal cases. We champion better maternity care through every family's story. Fletcher Solicitors, for every birth, for every baby, for every family. For more information about how we can help, visit www.fletchersolicitors.co.uk.
In this special double episode of the Mama podcast, we explore how education, advocacy, and community action are helping to create a safer and more trusted maternity system for families across the UK. First, we're joined by Megan Rossiter, founder of Birth Ed, who shares her mission to empower parents through evidence-based education, informed decision-making, and positive birth experiences. We then continue the conversation with Safia Saad from Chaptag's Fund Future Midwives, discussing the future of maternity care, the challenges facing the midwifery profession, and why investing in the next generation of midwives has never been more important. Together, these conversations provide valuable insight into the changes needed to improve maternity services, build trust between families and healthcare professionals, and create better outcomes for parents, babies, and communities. Whether you're a parent, healthcare professional, student midwife, or simply passionate about improving maternity care, this is an episode you won't want to miss.
Well, welcome to this episode of the Mama Podcast. I'm Heidi Eldridge, the founder and CEO of Mama Academy, and I'm here now with Megan Rossiter from Birth Ed. Thank you so much for joining us, Megan. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on the show today. So do you want to start by introducing yourself to everybody and telling us all who you are and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, thank you very much for having me. Heidi and I met in person for the very first time recently. So yeah, it's nice to be having an opportunity to kind of chat in this way. So I'm the founder of this organisation called Birth Ed. I've been supporting families in their kind of birth preparation mainly for the last 10 years. Prior to that, I did my midwifery training, stopped in my third year to go and have my son, and then, as you know, as life does, pivoted, and ended up founding Birth Ed, with a real focus on creating birth education, antenatal education that really kind of broke apart a lot of the polarizing nature of conversations that women and families face in their kind of journey through pregnancy and birth, to empower them to give birth in whatever way feels right for them, but also with a real focus on supporting them to kind of navigate the maternity system as it exists today. I found that a lot of birth preparation was either quite idealistic, but didn't really offer a very realistic preparation for what birth looked like, or in some ways kind of groomed women to just do what the system was telling them rather than kind of giving them back the power. And so that's been a large focus of my work for the last decade. Alongside all of this, I have worked in a lot of kind of activism roles. I have done a lot of work for the national and local maternity and neonatal collectives. National and local maternity and neonatal voices partnerships, supporting the kind of development of services in our local area with the kind of midwifery and maternity teams. And I have it is coming out on Thursday. I don't know when this episode's going to go out, but on Thursday, the 25th, my first book called Birth Power is coming out. It is 50% manifesto for change in maternity services and 50% a guide for women, birthing people and families to help them kind of navigate the maternity world as we know it.
Wow.
Just a short intro then.
Yeah, that's a lot. Oh, I can't wait for your book to come out on Thursday. That sounds absolutely fantastic. How can people get hold of that and see that? Obviously, they can follow you on social media and they can find out where to get it.
Yeah, it's everywhere. Anywhere you'd normally buy a book, the big Amazon or your local bookshop, Kindle, audiobook, however you would like to listen or read it, you can get hold of it.
That is so exciting. So obviously, over the years, you've helped support thousands of families, I would imagine. What would you say that best support for them looks like?
I think in the kind of state of the world as it exists right now, it is, first of all, just an understanding of how birth works, like literally what happens inside somebody's body in the late stages of pregnancy, if they were to go into labor and give birth and kind of immediately postnatally. How does that work? How does that happen? I think we need to have as deep an understanding of how the maternity system operates and where those two things can potentially clash and not go well together. I think they need a deep understanding of what their choices are, and the choices that they have are often much wider than we're often kind of led to believe that they are. And then I think we also need, and this is the bit that's kind of missing from a lot of birth and pregnancy care and preparation, is a kind of set of critical thinking skills, so that when we're provided with information, we can say, how does this apply to me? Is this relevant? Is this important to me? Or is this not important to me? And that way we can start making decisions about our care that are really personalised. And I think that's probably the missing piece in modern pregnancy antenatal care.
That's really, really interesting. And a lot of that I wish I'd been told I was pregnant. What do you think makes the biggest difference to families?
I think the thing that is of the most importance, again, that is often missing, is trust. And I don't mean necessarily, well, it is in part that families that are going in pregnant, giving birth, however they're giving birth, that they trust the care providers that are there. And often we're lacking that trust because of narratives that exist in the media, previous birth trauma. There's so many things that break down that direction of trust. The thing that I think makes the most difference to families is when they are trusted. And that is another conversation that is so frequently missing, is that actually, if your midwife or your doctor trusts you, it's much easier to trust them. And that looks like being believed when you're saying something, being trusted if you're saying, this is what it feels like, this is what I'm worried about. When your care team are not making assumptions about how you're behaving or what you want, and you are trusted, then we can create a relationship that's actually quite meaningful in maternity care.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm just thinking about the healthcare professionals themselves. When they have a really good work environment and a really good culture, and they seem to do, retention really well. From what you've seen, what are those teams doing differently that have really good retention and work culture?
So I think so much of this conversation comes down to trust at every level. And when you have a team of clinicians who are all trusted, then you can provide an element of independence. And I think that tends to be a thing that is very powerful. When staff are trusted, whether that's to manage their own workload, their working days, their shift patterns, their clinical care, particularly as midwives, they're supposed to be able to be independent practitioners where they have autonomy in the way that they practice. And a lot of the way that NHS in particular operates today is that there is very little autonomy in the way that midwives are practicing. And it's not always showing up as support, but as kind of fear of criticism or wanting to kind of fit with the status quo, rather than literally feeling completely able to directly respond to the family that are in front of you and what needs they are kind of presenting. And when you have a management that trusts the team that they are in charge of, and that team trusts the families that they are looking after, that trust element goes in both directions. And that is when care is really powerful and probably the safest.
Mm. And I guess that works with mentorship as well. When they're mentoring, say, student midwives or newly qualified midwives, what does that look like as well when you're giving really good mentorship to your colleagues?
So I think what we often forget is that we replicate what we see. So when we're learning to do something, or we're feeling unconfident in doing something. The way that we're going to feel confident in doing it is to sort of see somebody else doing it and copy it. When we kind of look at the state of the maternity system as it is at the moment, we've got this big dilemma at the minute where there's potentially a generation of student midwives that are going in actually lacking some of the fundamental midwifery skills that they're going to need, particularly supporting physiological birth, because that's not something that many students will be seeing frequently in maternity care. But equally, if staff are rushed off their feet and they don't have time to really have long, meaningful conversations with families, then it can be difficult as a student to work out, how is my time best spent? How do I provide that care? So if as a student or a newly qualified midwife, there is real time carved out for the mentors to be able to put it into building up the next generation of staff that are coming through, where those students, those newly qualified midwives, feel deeply supported emotionally and kind of practically, then that's a really important thing in ensuring that our workforce are cared for and develop confidence and skills that is essential for providing safe care.
I'd love to know as well, because we've covered this in other episodes, so I've asked others this question, but I'd love to ask it from your viewpoint as well. You just mentioned about, looking after themselves and looking after the carers. What does that look like in an ideal situation? How can the staff make sure that they look after each other?
I think it comes down a lot to culture, where people feel safe to say when they're finding something hard, and that they're not just going to, there's this word resilience that's kind of floated around in maternity circles all the time. And kind of, we sometimes conflate the word resilience with sort of shut up and work harder. And actually that's a very different thing to feeling emotionally supported and able to continue working in a difficult working environment. So when an environment enables somebody to say, this is what I found hard, without fear of reprimand or, fear that actually it's not going to be met with compassion, then that is the kind of the toxic workplace environments that are coming up in all of the maternity reports that are kind of coming out. So in order to change culture, it needs to be at every level, right down from kind of board level management, because you need this resilience or this level of support at every level, because it is difficult for people working at every level, from the kind of MSWs working on a clinic to the kind of, I don't know, maternity head of midwifery. And all of those people are in charge of changing the culture. And I think we've got to kind of come together to change that, so that we can be emotionally supported. I can't actually remember what your original question was.
It was about how they can look after each other.
How they look after each other, yeah. And
Well-being.
yeah, but I do also think that it can't just be on individuals to be kind to each other, to look out for each other. There needs to be structural protection for individuals to have space to reflect, to breathe, because we have such high rates of time off sick and people who are off work because the work itself has made them physically or emotionally unwell, or both. And so the protection of that time to reflect, to decompress, to connect with your kind of team members and offer psychological support where it's needed. If that's not protected, then we're not providing safe care, because the psychological safety of everybody in that space is important, including the staff. And so I think some of it needs to just be a kind of day-to-day culture shift where people are feeling supported and valued at work. And part of it needs to be mandated supervision like they have in kind of psychology professions, where if you speak to people that that work as psychologists or something, they find it absolutely mad that people can be, staff can be exposed to trauma every day, and that the psychological support is not mandatory. So I would say sort of both things from a kind of interpersonal level, but also a kind of structural change.
Mm. And you mentioned earlier about managing own workloads and things like that. Now, I know the Fed is built on a very sort of flexible working model. Is there anything that you think would inspire other midwifery teams? Is there a model that you think could work for the NHS?
Well, I think there have been examples of it throughout recent history in the past kind of 30, 40 years. We've seen models of care. One example that springs to mind is the Albany midwives, who they were self-employed, so they were not employed directly by the trust. And in being self-employed, they were able to hold on to that autonomy. And they were I won't give a full rendition of it. Becky Reed and the other midwives that work there can describe it in a lot of detail, but they were given independence in deciding which days they worked, which hours they worked, and they were given 12 weeks holiday a year. So they were on call all the time, but they had long holidays, and that won't work for everybody, but there are definitely midwives for whom that would work, and that created a culture in which they were happy to be going to work and able to provide care that was significantly safer, massively improved safety and reduced poor outcomes for a very, very wide group of families that they were supporting. So I think that when we talk about, we're constantly trying to reinvent the wheel, like, how do we save the modern maternity system? Well, let's just look at what works and just copy it. We don't need to think of something new. Go, this worked well, and there are pockets of this happening in the UK right now. So rather than sitting there and brainstorming, I can't tell you how many meetings I've sat in where people are just trying to reinvent ideas, and you're like, the amount of NHS money that is being wasted sitting in meetings like this, where we all go, oh, what about this? What about this? What about this? When you could just go, okay, this hospital seems to be doing this thing well. Let's just ask them what they did and copy them. And it can be as simple as that. I think sometimes we really try to overcomplicate it.
I completely agree. I see things like this all the time. I think there is a lack of communication as well. That's the problem. Nothing's really sort of joined up, and there isn't a system where we're all able to learn from each other, and you might even find neighbouring hospitals or neighbouring trusts, and they're all trying to come up with an idea that the neighbouring hospitals all already doing. So I completely agree. And we get that sometimes with our wallets. We speak to midwives, they're like, oh, well, we really need to get this information into the hands of women. Now, how on earth could we do that? And it's like, well, we've been doing it for, over 10 years. Here's the wallets, here's the passports, because you're digital, add whatever you want to it. So yeah, I completely understand that one. So much time and money can be wasted. Well, I'm just thinking about if there's a head of midwifery listening at the moment and they're thinking of building a sort of flexible working model, where would you suggest that they'd start? What's your top tips?
I think I think it's that. I think this already exists. So don't try and don't try and invent it. The first thing to do is to go and find a head of a team somewhere for whom it is working well, ask them what they do, and then try to replicate it in a way that meets the needs of the families that are entering care in your area and the kind of staffing that you have available. That's where we end up spiraling, going, oh, but this area they serve these people, this area they serve this. We're very different. Ultimately, we're all trying to create the same thing. We're all trying to offer care that is safe, that is compassionate, that is providing practice continuity where possible. Those things will serve all people. And so, yeah, I think just don't overthink it. Just copy paste wherever we can, and then reduce the amount of work that we're trying to invent for ourselves.
If you could bottle up the very best of culture in midwifery care, what would be in that?
Well, what if they've got unlimited money and unlimited midwives, I would absolutely, it would be a continuity team where there was a small team of midwives looking after a small team of families, where they were able to create relationships with each other, where they really got opportunity to know each other. I mean, this is not rocket science. This is every paper that's ever existed tells us that this is the way to offer not only the kind of care that families most like to receive, but also the safest care, the way to kind of reduce unwanted harm, unwanted intervention, unnecessary harm, unnecessary intervention, and to sort of differentiate and provide the intervention and the support where it is needed. So I think that would kind of absolutely be the first pillar. The second pillar would be that those clinicians were supported at every level and kind of well integrated into maternity services themselves, so that those relationships, those trusting relationships existed between midwives and obstetricians, midwives and management, midwives and maternal medicine, whatever the other people that are kind of involved, so that we're sort of creating that village that families need around them at this really vulnerable time of life, but that is also a nice and a safe environment for staff to be working, and care that went beyond just clinical appointments. So there's an incredible team that actually I don't live there anymore, but where I had my babies was in Kingston, and they had a home birth team, and this I wouldn't say has to be home birth specific. It could be, I think they've got a fantastic birth after cesarean team. What defines the team doesn't matter, but the way that they provided care was, as far as I'm aware, good for the midwives that were working in it and wonderful for the families that were receiving the care. And that care went beyond just the clinical appointments. There was opportunities to meet the midwives online every month. There was a picnic that I went to that when they were sort of celebrating however many years of their team existing, and it changed the dynamic from it being a kind of them versus us, clinicians, families, like they were on different sides, and allowed you to see the staff as human, individual people that have got their own families and their own lives. And when we break, there can be, there's a lot of conversation around this in healthcare, is should there be this professional barrier between staff and families? Should there be uniforms where they are very easily identifiable? Or does this kind of contribute to feelings of hierarchy in maternity care? And I think for me, one of the most important things to get rid of in maternity care is any feeling of hierarchy. And when you see your carers as humans rather than, robots that work in a maternity system, or as part of a system rather than an actual individual person, when we see them as a person, we can go, okay, they might make a mistake, or they might, be tired today, and it creates that compassion back again. And that we have to have compassion both ways. We have to have trust both ways if we want to have a relationship that is meaningful, and we have to have a meaningful relationship for care to be safe. So I think that would be, if I was creative, and I would have that for every family that was accessing care, regardless of whether they wanted a home birth, a cesarean, whether they had a very complex pregnancy, whether it was their fourth, whatever, all of them.
That sounds amazing. That sounds absolutely wonderful. I'm just thinking, when you were saying that, I became really good friends with my midwives, and then some of them became trustees for the charity. And I'm kind of thinking now, obviously that doesn't happen with everyone. You don't end up being really good friends with your midwife. Some do, obviously, and some keep in touch. And I don't know whether it was because I lost my baby, and so I kept in touch with some of the amazing staff that cared for us at that point. But then I'm thinking I met others along the way, when I went on to have my other two. I mean, I saw one of them this morning on the school run, and she was like, "Hi, Heidi," and I was like, "Hi, Sarah." So yeah, I think that's so important to have that relationship, because then, if you go on to have another baby and you see the same people again, it really helps with that trust and that bond and that confidence. And then you get to ask them so many more questions, and you're more open and honest with your feelings and things like that. So that is so important and really interesting.
Yeah, and
I'm thinking about what you.
I don't think, and I think, and actually, I had a very similar experience to you, where I really bonded with, particularly the one midwife that was looking after me, came to my youngest's first birthday party, and there's another midwife that looked after me who's coming to my book launch next week, and my youngest is 5, so those relationships are amazing. But I also, just to sort of counter, I suppose, a challenge that could come here, is that I'm not saying you have to be friends with your midwife. That's lovely if that happens, but there's no way every midwife and every family that's entering are going to have anything, in common to potentially develop a friendship. But, I can really, really vividly remember it was actually the first water birth that I'd ever been at. I think I was like a first year student midwife, and I had done a placement on Community for like 4 or 5 months. And there was this family that had come in. We would never in a million years have crossed paths in any other way. Beyond birth, there's probably no way we would ever have a friendship. But I had seen her every single one of her antenatal appointments with the Community midwife. And then my placement changed. And then I went on to the birth centre. And then this woman came into the birth centre to give birth. And bear in mind, I'd never even seen a water. So I was not there. I was not there as somebody that you'd look at and be like, you're the person in this room with expertise. Like, I want you here to keep me safe. But this woman walked in and she was really scared, and she just saw me, and you could just see like relief wash over her. And she was like, I am so glad that you're here. And it was that sort of thing that was like, I mean, I'm not going to be able to like offer very much by way of like clinical support if you need it. But she was a very, very worried mum, and she was very panicked, and she sort of almost kind of ended up in the birth centre. It wasn't really almost where she planned to be. And just having that safe, familiar face, you could just tell instantly, you could just see this shift in her whole body just changed. And that's what, it wasn't a friendship. Other than, I think I got a lovely card from them. I never saw them ever again after that moment. But that's what relationship does. And I think that's what families deserve, because safety isn't just knowing that something's there in an emergency if you need it. It is an emotion. Safety is an emotion. And I think we don't describe it as an emotion. We describe it as a kind of physical thing. And I think, because emotions are hard to measure, they're often the things that are overlooked, but often the things that are as important.
Absolutely. I remember with my daughter, I had to have an emergency C-section in the end. And obviously I was very often panicky, and I've been through a big labour and all the rest of it. And I was in a bit of a state. But then all of a sudden I'm on the bed in the theatre, and my head turns this way and my head turns that way, and they're all my midwives that I'd had like the day before when I'd gone in to be induced, and had looked after me all through antenatal. And again, that relief. And I was like, you're here. Oh my gosh, you're here. And oh my gosh, you're there. And I was like, oh, how amazing. You're all going to meet my daughter at the same time. And it was wonderful. And I just remember that. I hold on to that. It was just so lovely, and also because I've been through such a traumatic experience previously as well, it really, really helped. So yeah, it is so, so powerful and makes such a difference. I was just thinking about what you said earlier about birth ed, and the fact that, you're empowering women, you're informing women, and you're making them feel really confident for their birth. What impact does that have on midwives when, women and birthing people are feeling so much better informed and confident?
I mean, I think this can swing two ways depending on your perspective as a midwife. I think some of the time it can be like just an enormous weight off. If you're the kind of midwife that is, I want to make sure everybody's got all of the information. I want to really support them, but I'm really struggling for time on top of all of the other clinical jobs that I've got to do. Knowing and feeling confident that they are accessing quality, evidence-based, reliable information, that then they can come to you and say, this is what I want to do. And then your job is to try and facilitate it and support it, rather than going, right, okay, we've got to go all the way back to, the course that I offer takes 7 hours for me to get through. There's no way that a midwife could do that individual person one after the other. You just wouldn't be able to. So I think in that way, it really kind of complements care if a midwife is trying to provide very personalized, empowering, compassionate care in that way. I think it can pose a challenge sometimes as a midwife when somebody is coming in knowing what they want and what they're allowed to ask for, and that they found the confidence to say it and to ask for it. And when you've got 100 other million things to do, and it would be much easier if they sort of just did what the system wanted them to do, it can be asking you to put your head above the parapet, which can be challenging as a midwife and can be uncomfortable as a midwife. And it takes a confidence as a clinician to go, actually, this person wants this. It isn't necessarily what our guidance says. And knowing then who to refer them to, how to facilitate what it is that they're asking for is sometimes challenging. And so I think it can offer that challenge as well. And sort of within this topic, I think what is important to say is, obviously I went into this work because I could see that this wasn't being provided by the maternity system, and I felt like families deserved to have it. However, I don't think it should take a switched on family to go, this is the kind of information I want, I'm going to go and find it. It should be that they should be able to step into maternity care at the beginning of pregnancy, be provided with nuanced, personalized, evidence-based information, and then whatever decision they make about their care, that is best, supported and facilitated to the safest and best of the clinician's ability. So, but that isn't happening on the whole in this country at the moment. Not through any fault of one individual person, but through a system that is understaffed, overworked, underfunded, we all know. And so it is, I always sort of like to caveat it with that, is like, I don't think that the way that I'm offering this provision, I don't think that's the silver bullet, because there are a lot of families that I'm not reaching. And so who is providing this for them, and how are they being supported to actually access personalized, empowered, nuanced care?
So on that note, midwifery has a bit of a negative press at the moment. It's really tough for midwives. I've been told that, some midwives don't want to admit to certain people that they are a midwife. They're keeping it quiet because of all the press attention and the reviews and the investigation that's taking place currently. Have you seen any optimism amongst midwives anywhere at the moment? Is there sort of real inspiration or hope that's going on? Because I want to end on a high note.
I think so. When I wrote the book, one thing that I wanted to be really careful of is, not feeding into this narrative of vilifying clinicians or midwives. And this exists so much, and it is so heightened at the moment with all of the reviews, but then the way that those reviews are reported in the press and on social media. And it really fuels, the start of pregnancy is the start of this kind of really polarizing time. And I think more so now than even 10 years ago, because of the way that social media is fueling it, where everybody is constantly pitted up against each other, whether that's a cesarean versus a home birth, whether that's formula feeding, bottle feeding, whatever it is, we're sort of told like it's one or the other. And the other place that this exists is kind of this type of birth or that type of birth, or women versus the system. And one thing that I'm really grateful for, having worked within the system and supported alongside it, as well as supporting families directly, independently, is that I've sort of got a unique position where I can go, well, I know what it's like to be in it, and I know what the individuals work, I know who they are, and they're, on the whole, wonderful humans. And so it's about, I always talk about it, trying to create a team where we're all on the same side, because that's when care is going to be safest, that's when care is going to be most empowering. And so I think the sort of way that I'm talking about having this conversation, and I'm certainly seeing from lots of the midwives that I know, is that actually we're all aiming for the same thing. And I think, again, this friction can exist in a lot of the kind of maternity activism circles, where we're talking about what can we do to improve maternity care, and there might be two polarizing ideas as to kind of how you would do that. But when we remember that actually ultimately we are all asking for the same thing, midwives are asking for the same thing, the families are asking for the same thing, the activists, the obstetricians, everybody is trying to create safer, more positive, enjoyable care. And so I think it's kind of holding onto that approach, is that whenever we see something polarizing, whenever we see things like that on the news, is to take a step back and go, well, what is it that we're actually asking for here? And quite frequently it will always be the same thing.
Yeah, I completely agree. So for all the midwives, students, maternity leaders that are listening to this conversation, what's the one thing that you want them to take away from this discussion today?
I think for me, it's just that trust is central to everything. Trust in every direction. So trust from leaders down to staff, trust from staff to families. And when we trust in that direction, that's how we can build it up the other way. That's how women will start to trust the maternity system again. And sometimes trust takes a little bit of a leap of faith. But when we know that we're all aiming for the same thing, we just need to, nobody's gonna fix this on their own. None of us. As much as a lot of people think they will, nobody's going to fix it on their own, and we have to trust each other at every level.
Yeah, I completely agree. I get so upset and frustrated sometimes because I want to fix everything. I wish I had a magic wand, because that's just me. I just love fixing things, and I'm constantly coming up with new, resources and solutions for this and for that. And so I find it very difficult when I don't have that magic wand. I can't control everything because I'm not in control. But you're right. Together, if absolutely every one of us work together, change could absolutely happen.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah, I know. Everything crossed. Well, thank you so much, Megan, for joining us today. How can people find you?
So on social media, I'm mainly on Instagram at birth_ed. You can buy my book. It's called Birth Power. It's sort of half, you can access it both from a midwife's perspective and a family's perspective. So it's really aimed at both audiences. On all the usual book purchasing platforms.
Fabulous. Well, I can't wait. I can't wait for that to come out on Thursday. That sounds absolutely fantastic. Well, we look forward to seeing you again very soon, Megan, because no doubt our paths will cross very shortly again. And we're both part of the National Maternity and Neonatal Collective, which work will be ongoing for quite some time to campaign for change amongst the government. Basically, that's what that's all about. So yes, I will continue to work alongside you to see change happen.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for having me.
So now I'm joined with Safia Saad, who is a third year student midwife. Thank you so much for joining us, Safia. I'd love to know what it's like day to day to be a student midwife.
Yeah, thank you so much, Heidi, for having me on. It's a real pleasure. Um, for me, currently as a third year student midwife, I'm part of the case loading team at my trust. So it means that day to day I'm on call. So I'm following my midwife's shift pattern. And we have appointments, antenatal and postnatal, and then we go on call during the day and also during the night. And if anyone is in labour or needs labour care, we then go in and provide one-to-one care, which I really, really enjoy. And I've been able to really appreciate the true impact of continuity. We learn about continuity from day one. And usually student midwives don't actually get to experience continuity of carer. And so it's been a real pleasure and privilege. And it's really shown me that this is the kind of midwife that I want to be when I qualify in a few months' time, hopefully.
Wow. So how does that work being a student? Because obviously you're doing your studying, you're having to go into the university, and then you go into placement. How does continuity work when you're a student?
So it works. So in your third year at my university, we also have a continuity project where you caseload women. Um, Obviously, the women also see you alongside a midwife, but you're the one mainly providing the continuity of carer. But in like for example, in the team that I'm in, I generally will just join them when I'm at my placement block. So as a student, you have placements, and you also have university time where you're learning, and then you also have exams and you have essays. A lot of the time, though, you have like essays due at the same time while you're on placement. So it can be really tricky to manage your time and, like, yeah, just pick and choose what you need to focus on. Especially like on placement, you are providing care to women and families. And so it's not, for example, like an office job where you just sat and like, yeah, it's very, very different. And I think it can be really difficult to navigate, but when you have passion, when you're passionate about what you do, it is easy. It is, yeah.
Oh, that's so lovely. And I'm sure you've made a real impact already, even though you're only in your third year. Is there a particular moment you can think of where you felt that you've really made a difference for families?
I think it can be really easy as a student midwife to not realize the impact you have and to kind of feel like you're just kind of, yeah, just riding a boat. Don't know if that's the best analogy I could think of. But for me, one thing that really sticks out to me, I provided labour care for a woman towards the end of my second year, and again, just usual. I didn't do anything different, and it really goes to show that women. This is such a like you only have your babies once, and they do remember. Like my mum remembers her midwives 27 years ago with me, and with my sisters. And the woman, I came back. I think I finished my placement time, and I went back in September to do some extra shifts. And one of the managers saw me and said, "Safia, there's a card on labor ward for you. It's been sitting there for a while. Go and get it." And so, yeah, it was very beautifully written, and she was really, really thankful for the care that me and the midwife, you know, did. And I genuinely didn't even realize the impact it has. And like, subconsciously that the care you provide is so important, and, to treat women, with the same way that you would want to be treated. But that, like, I remember crying when I read the card, and I actually read it out at one of the protests, because it really touched me, and I have it on my like bookcase next to my birth counter, just as a reminder. Some days are really hard, and I don't want to go to placement, but that this is what I'm doing it for the families. And it's like but I've heard so many stories from other student midwives that, if they picked up a heart murmur and they saved a baby's life, being, with the women while, providing that true care while the midwife, is doing all the documentation. And yeah, it's just being able to really support families how you want to.
I love that. It just shows how important students are, and those families will never forget you. They will never forget you.
No, no, I don't forget them either. Honestly, like, even like for example, the lady that I cared for, I didn't facilitate the birth, but it just goes to show that it's not about that. It's about the care they receive and about how you treat them. You know, Women just want to be treated with dignity, respect, want to be listened to, and so yeah, it really, really just shows how important student midwives are and how important midwives are, and how good care is so important.
Absolutely. We've just been discussing the topic of retention.
Yeah.
So, what does that mean to you in terms of being a student?
Like, I think it's quite tricky at the moment, especially with everything and maternity services being under scrutiny. But I think the main problem with retention is the fact that there's chronic understaffing. So maternity units have been short-staffed for decades, and midwives currently, the RCM says they work 100,000 hours unpaid each week just to be able to keep those services afloat and to keep them running. But that's not really sustainable. And, the midwives want better care for the women, and the women want better care for themselves. And so I think when you have short staffing, you get midwives that are burnt out. You get, they're missing their breaks. They're not able to go to the toilet. Just basic human needs. I'm a sufferer of chronic UTIs. I can't afford not to have a toilet break in a 12.5 hour shift. Um, and it's just setting unrealistic standards. Midwives should be able to get the break they need, go to toilet, eat, drink. How can they care for somebody if they're not well, if they're not cared for themselves? And I think because of that, a lot of the times you get moral injury and midwives leaving the service, either going to private services or just leaving the NHS altogether or leaving midwifery altogether. And not because they don't love it, but because they know that they can't provide the care that they want to in the system. And I think midwives for decades have been screaming out about short staffing and how maternity services need more funding. And it just seems like it's a constant battle to get more funding into these services. And I think it truly is because it's a predominantly women field, mainly caring for women. Um, and yeah,
It's very difficult out there, but you have this fabulous campaign
yeah.
that you've launched, Fund Future Midwives, which we have been following very closely. Tell us all about it, why you started it up and how it's going and what the goal is.
Yeah. Thank you. And we really appreciate all the support we get from everybody. So Fund Future Midwives was born. I didn't intend to start a campaign. I came up with the idea of a protest back in February because I was feeling really frustrated that I was not going to have a job when I qualify. And this started from last year. So the previous third year students were told quite soon before they qualified that there wasn't going to be jobs. And I remember back then feeling horrified. Like we've worked for 3 years, or they've worked for 3 years, and they're so close to the finish line, and now you're being told that there's no place for you, even though the NHS desperately needs more midwives. And in the end, they got jobs, but 6 months late. And I wasn't naive to the fact that it could impact us as well. And so I wasn't very surprised when my trust and trusts around the country said that there was no jobs and that they had a job freeze. And I just felt so upset that I've put in 3 years of hard work. I left my previous job. I've foregone a salary for 3 years. It's we do a minimum of 2,300 clinical hours. From day one, you're providing care to women and families, and it just felt like a massive injustice, given especially the climate of maternity services, that understaffing and inadequate staffing is, one of the major reasons why, bad care happens. And, these inquiries and maternity reports keep saying the same thing. And so it just didn't make sense to me. And so I made a poster for a protest. Some of my uni friends were, helping me along. And the protest happened, and I was on the radio. We were doing interviews, and all of a sudden it was like, you need to have a name, you need to have a logo, you need to have a website, all of these things. And also I was trying to balance, writing my dissertation, having my exams, being on placement. But it felt like I was using my energy in the right direction, because being like, losing hope is really, it's not great. And when you lose hope, there really is nothing else to look for. And so I used it as a way to channel my frustration and to try and make positive change. And so the aim of the campaign is to secure a true graduate guarantee. I don't like using that word because the previous graduate guarantee wasn't actually it wasn't successful at all. And a third of newly qualified midwives from last year are still unemployed, and the ones that are employed are majority on fixed term contracts. And so we know that wasn't successful, and we're looking for something that's true, that's going to be true to what it says. We have the skills, we have the qualifications. I think also an important thing for people to understand is midwifery is very different to other degrees. So before I studied midwifery, I studied human rights law, and you qualify with a degree, but you don't have, in terms of like a registration, I don't qualify as a solicitor, I didn't qualify as a barrister. You have to complete a training contract to do that. But with midwifery, you qualify with a PIN. You have a registration. You can practice as a midwife, and so we should expect a job upon qualification. There's just no jobs, and we've done lots of freedom of information requests, supported by the Association of Medical Midwives, and the statistics are really sobering. There really is no jobs. There's 2,800 of us that are approximately about to qualify this year in England, and nationally there's about 30 jobs that are trickling out, and so I have to now face the reality of I have to go back to my previous job, working hospitality. And that's not what I want to do. I want a better care for women. I want to, do what I was trained to do. Um, it feels like there's something that the government is not understanding, and they've just cut maternity service funding. So it's very difficult.
Well, congratulations on all your hard work, because it's so important. It's absolutely vital that we have enough midwives to provide care in the UK. So, where's the campaign at the moment?
So right now it's we were really close to having a meeting with West Streeting, but as I'm sure a lot of people will know, that he has resigned, and we're now trying to bridge the gap with the new health secretary. Michelle Walsh has just been appointed as the maternity advisor to the government, and we have had conversations with her about how there's a lack of funding in terms of newly qualified posts, so band 5 posts, and the next stage of our campaign is doing a petition hand-in. So we're hoping to do the petition hand-in on the 15th of June, which the RCM recognises as, the Day of the Student Midwife. So it feels like it was meant to be. But hopefully that will pressure the government into realising that we need funding, and we need it now. We can't wait. The midwives that are unemployed from last year, they've been 7-8 months without work. They haven't been able to use their skills. I don't want to be in that position. And I know it can be really scary as well to not use your skills for that long, and then to have, especially as a newly qualified midwife, you're not experienced. You don't have it cemented in your head. You're still learning. In the first year after you qualify is the year where people say you learn the most, and you solidify your learning, and you're able to practice truly as an autonomous practitioner. And so I think, that's our next turn in terms of the campaign. There might be some more protests, we don't know. We're trying now just to get petition signatures up. So we're contacting lots of people, asking them to share it. And hopefully we're going to have a debate in Parliament soon. One of the MPs, Clive Lewis, is really supportive, and he's asked for it to be a debate. And so we're just trying to get public attention as well, because I think people don't realise, and I think it's a very fine line. We're not trying to scare service users, women, families. We're just trying to make things better for them. And midwives do so much unpaid to keep those services running. But we want to go into the workforce to support them, and for that not to be, a vicious cycle. And so I don't want women and families to be scared, but we're just trying to really provide the best we can. And, continuity of care is so vital. But they can't run when you don't have enough staff.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, the work you're doing is just fabulous. We are behind you 100%. And so, in any way that we can support, attend your protest, things like that, we're members of the different APPG groups. We work closely alongside Michelle Welsh as well. So, anything we can help with, do please let us know.
Thank you so much. It really means a lot.
Thanks so much, Safia, and we will be following your Fund Future Midwives campaign very closely.
Thank you.
Fletcher Solicitors are proud to support the Mama Academy by sponsoring this podcast series. At Fletcher Solicitors, we champion better maternity care. For every birth, for every baby, for every family.
If you enjoyed listening to this episode, share it with a friend or colleague. Make sure you follow us so you don't miss out on our next episode. If you'd like to support our work by fundraising or volunteering, please email contact@mamaacademy.org.uk. For more information on pregnancy and maternity services, please visit our website at www.mamaacademy.org.uk. We're also on all of your favourite social media channels. See you next time!